The Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. It's a well-known story, often summarized with the title, "The Raising of Lazarus," without a second thought. Start reading the actual story, all 44 verses, which we didn't read this morning. You're welcome. And you quickly realize that this isn't so much about the raising of Lazarus, which takes up only 2 short verses at the end. This is about the death of Lazarus. A point the writer of the 4th Gospel makes abundantly clear. Lazarus is dead, Jesus matter-of-factly announces to the disciples before they even get to the tomb. He has been dead 4 days, Mary reiterates at the tomb, or Martha reiterates at the tomb, long enough that, as the King James Version so eloquently puts it, he stinketh. And even after being raised, did you notice Lazarus still is identified as the dead man? Here is a story that confronts death head on. Here is a story that gives us permission to weep, as Jesus himself weeps, as Jesus, so overcome with emotion, not just once or twice, but 3 times, breaks down and cries for Lazarus, his friend. "Where have you laid him?" Jesus is here to pay his respects, to visit his friend's grave as any one of us might do. The focus here isn't so much on the raising of Lazarus as it is the death of Lazarus, the mourning of Lazarus. When did you first know about death? Asks Cole Arthur Riley in a chapter simply titled Mortality in her book Black Liturgies, Prayers, Poems, and Meditations for Staying Human. "If there was a singular moment when I first became aware of my own mortality," she writes, "I cannot recall it. I remember the first funeral I attended, the first time death got close enough to mean something, but learning about my own temporality, it was unremarkable." And she proceeds to ponder What does it mean that the day we discover death itself is immemorable to most of us? Are we in denial from the start, learning to look away from this shared fate? Our liturgical tradition hardly lets us look away. Each Lent, we begin with that peculiar ritual of marking our foreheads with ashes, reminding ourselves and each other that we are human, mortal, finite. At the other end of the year, All Saints reminds us yet again of the truth of the refrain we sing, all of us go down to the dust. As we assemble altars of remembrance with photographs and speak aloud the names of our beloved dead. It's a reality perhaps especially impossible to ignore for a congregation whose place of worship sits on the grounds of a cemetery, with loved ones buried a short walk away from where we now sit. To lose someone is to lose a world, Riley writes. Everything that remains in their absence, so too is altered. The familiar becomes strange. Even those who are ready to pass may still weep at death's door. Death hurts. We don't have to pretend otherwise. When Jesus saw Mary weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Death hurts. And Jesus began to weep. We don't have to pretend otherwise. What a gift this story on this All Saints Sunday. What a gift this particular Jesus, through the lens of the fourth gospel, who experiences the same kind of grief that we do, who weeps for death itself. See how he loved him. For all the death, for all the grief, for all the tears, the story doesn't end there. In the midst of doubts and derision, questioning his capacity to heal, of accusations and laments that he didn't come sooner, of his own tear-clouded eyes and the literal stench of death, Jesus marches right up to the tomb, goes to where the death is, and cries aloud, "Lazarus, come out." Here is a story that confronts death head on. And here is a story that speaks into death with a word of life. Death be now, but never last. A tomb once sealed with a stone, a weeping Mary, a disciple called by name. If it sounds like another story, it should. Mary Magdalene thought death be now. End of story. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary came to the tomb to grieve for her friend. That's all she expected. Tell me where you have laid him. Sound familiar? Called by name, Mary. She runs from the tomb, unbound by the weight of death be now, freed to proclaim, death never lasts. I have seen the Lord. Death is no more the last word of Lazarus' story than it is the last word of Jesus' story and our story. Death be now, and so we weep, fully and honestly, but never last. And so we trust in a God who weeps with us, a God who does and will wipe every last tear from our eyes. Alleluia. Amen.